Hey, Rajesh.
Hi, hello, mate. Can you hear me?
Yeah, got you. Okay, right, let's get into it.
Big Basket Now presents RCB Bold Diaries.
The reason I've got this written down is I think it probably arrived in my head at about 3:30 or 4 a.m, annoyingly, woke me up and I thought I better write this down. So these were some of my strongest reflections on what we chatted the other day and some bits about next steps. Worth doing a reminder on some of our sort of guiding principles. So again, it's important to remember that we said we were going to try and prioritise spending money on our starters. So proportionally looking to get 85%-ish, I think we talked about, maybe even higher on our starters, see how that looks, but at least budget accordingly. So being brave enough to have our money on the field. We also talked about spending money on Indians and Indian core and trusting that we can get overseas talent because of the supply available. So the first thing is, I've been thinking a little bit about how do we assess the players in this next phase. We need to make sure that we're assessing players against how we want to play. That is key now at this stage. And they might be sort of output related, or it might even be attributes, because we might not have an output or a metric. So we need to be thinking about outputs and attributes there. When we talk about outputs, we should be looking quite specifically at overseas batter, and we are wanting aggressive intent there. Well, we should look specifically at things like evidence that they have the ability to attack, say spin in the power play, and maybe even continue that attacking intent in over 7 to 11. The second thing that I'd like us to do when it comes to assessing players is, I want us to be really clear on a player's typical return. And when I say a typical return, because you could have players where they get lots of high scores and lots of low scores, and their average might be misleading. But actually, if we look at how frequently they get certain scores, it gives us a pattern. I also want to look at what their best looks like. When they have a good day, how good does it get? Because we need to know that we've got players that have got a bit of that X factor performance in them. The other day, we did depth quite a lot in single roles, and actually when we've done it in the past. But I almost don't want to work in single rows. I want to work in combinations. So let's do top three and work out our depth. You know, in our top three, we know that Virat's there. We go with the other two. Which other player or role is most important to us? Great. Who complements that? Okay. If we don't get our second role, what does that mean for what we need in our third role? Like, we have to approach it in that way. Same for 5 to 7, same for our pace attack, same for our spin attack. The third thing on my list here, which is what Rajesh raised and a few of you talked about, we're going to need to do some structural what-ifs. So where supply is particularly low, like Indian wrist spinners, and there's a risk we don't get one of our targets, what might a pivot look like so that we can make the best of that scenario? The fourth thing I reflected on was we need to make sure as we map out depth, we need to be really clear on which of our depth options are at risk of being right to matched or purchased. There's a couple of reasons why we wanted an Indian core. First being that we feel like it's a good way to try and win the tournament, obviously. But I've been looking a little bit into caps and Indian caps. So up here you've got our context and then you've got a couple of examples to compare to. So before last year's IPL started, so going into the season, 65% of our total caps on Indian players, so we're not talking about overseas players here, on Indian players were held in these two people, DK and Virat. And that was 479 caps in total, IPL caps, across the total 742. The next highest was Siraj with 79. So you can see a huge drop-off from those two, Siraj. And I think the next one then was Karan Sharma, 75, and then another massive drop-off down to like 25 or 30. So that's quite an unusual distribution of caps held in two people. Now, I've not compared it to every team, but I've compared that to a couple of teams, and the teams that finished top 2, because we keep using that as our focus. So KK are not a million miles away, but still different. So 8 out of their 15 players versus our 10 out of 17 had less than 14 caps, so 53%. And their top 2 represented 48%. And then if you look at SRH, only 6 out of 17 had less than 14 caps, so 35%, you know, not far off half. And then their top 2 only represent 37%. So they had a much more even distribution of Indian caps across their group.
बस यही बोलना है, यही तुम्हारा ऐड। Yeah, that's it.
सही है यार. Now delivering in 10 minutes.
Right, why don't we talk through the different types of team structures?
Big Basket Now presents RCB Bold Diaries.
Very likely that 3 of our 4 overseas slots are going to be, number 1, likely to be an overseas opener, and that might be one that we debate. And as you can see in those teams there, Freddie has got that highlighted in pink. So that's role number 1. It's probably more than a safe assumption and more than likely that we will have an overseas middle order batter, and it's currently carded at 5, could be 6, we don't have to worry about the number. 1 overseas quick is a definite. So I think we can trust that certainly 2, but probably 3 of those overseas roles will be opener, middle order and a quick. And then on top of that, you'll see that the 4th overseas, Freddie has listed a few different options here. And you'll see in the first couple of teams, there's 2 overseas quicks with a spin all-rounder and without a spin all-rounder. There's another option there with the 2 overseas middle order batters. There's an option there with an overseas mystery spinner. There's then a bat pace all-rounder and a pace bat all-rounder in that other slot. So there's different versions there of using that 4th overseas player. Well, some other roles that we have talked about, which kind of help us balance the team. I think strengths and potential weaknesses stand out quite quickly for those teams, but let's go through each of them in isolation first.
See, a couple of things from a structure point of view, which I want to put as context is, one is finisher, which is par, and one is deception in bowling. And in that we need to see what is the strength which lies in India, what are the strength which lies in somewhere else.
Yeah.
Whenever you bring in the overseas spinner, you look slightly imbalanced.
And that 6 and 7 is replacing DK. So that has to be strong enough to.
So, but okay, we'll get there. As we put team, you'll realize that there is a compromise somewhere. We have to be okay.
We need to see where it won't hurt us. We need to check that.
Yeah. So the strength of having an overseas opener there, for me, would be we could target someone that is uber aggressive, very, very aggressive. The types of names that we've talked about previously, like could be assault. But it just feels odd that we've got 2 overseas players at 7 and 8, which we are recognising them with the bat, and they might not face any balls. It just feels like a waste of overseas slots almost. But maybe I'm overthinking it. But on average, how many balls does a number 7 face or a number 8?
Or 2.
Okay, so I'll tell you what I'm saying is 7 and 8 might not face a ball and they might bowl 2 overs each. That could be the pattern for most of your games.
Correct.
Do you want to spend your money on the overseas like that?
And that is minimal
That doesn't feel like a great return on investment to me. They might not face many balls at all at 7 and 8. Some games they might not get in. They might bowl 2 overs each.
Do you think you'll be happier with Bhuvi, Yasdayal, Hazelwood, or Bhuvi, Yasdayal, Rabada, or Bhuvi, Yasdayal, Shami? And I only ask this because, again, stats, and it's very proven that one overseas fast bowler is a must almost, and that they have been so critical in victories. Any team that won the tournament.
We are not saying it's a weakness. Mystery spinner is not that hence that structure becomes weak. No,
that's
a choice.
Yeah, so I suppose I would call these pros and cons as opposed to weaknesses. I think if I look at Team 5, it feels like the most complete structure.
That is probably our best team we can put out of the park.
Big Basket Now presents RCB Bold Diaries.